ending up killing your industries. So it's important, as we are doing engagements between countries, we are involving our sector so that we know that this sector we need to protect, this sector we can progressively liberalize, so that we are not killing, we are not killing some of our private, some of our industries, which are just at the starting stage. Mutual mission agreements, this applies especially when you're looking at services. For example, lawyers, can you be able to work as a Kenyan lawyer? Can I be able to work in South Africa? So we need to look at it and see, can we be able to push for this, mutual recognition, so that we have movement of goods or movement of services, within the African continent. And we know as Africa, we have a huge unemployed youth population. So liberalization and mutual recognition agreements will assist us to be able to ensure that we are distributing this youth who are unemployed to different parts of whereby they may be able to work in different countries. Also, one of the policy requirements for me would be African standards. African standards for African trade. We have seen that when we are exporting our goods, for example, when we're exporting flowers or horticulture to Europe, the standards are so high that it becomes so costly for us, to work markets. There's so many certifications, there's so many things that are checked. So for me, one of the policy recommendations would be, can we have African standards for African trade? Let us not subject each other as countries to the very high level of standards. Yes, international standards, they are good to aspire to, but the moment you put such barriers, then it becomes very hard to be able to trade against each other. Another policy recommendation for me would be, joint or harmonized infrastructure investment. As the agreement has now made Africa one country, so it doesn't make sense that I will do an investment. I would say I will have the best railway, I will have the best road, I will have the best port. When you're doing investments, you're not only investing for your country, you're now in Africa. So our investments in infrastructure, our investments in roads, our investment in rails, in borders, need to factor in the bigger Africa agenda. Not only, we now not to need to stop thinking nationalistic. We need to start in terms of regions. We need to start thinking in terms of, the continent. What are the regional value chains that are there? How can we feed into it so that we can be able to ultimately feed into the Africa continent free trade area? I think commitment and goodwill, it's really important. This is just not another agreement. This is an agreement that needs to be championed from the top. This is not an agreement that you pass to a civil servant there and tell them to implement, or government agencies and tell them to implement. The success of this will solely depend on the commitment from the top, and these are the presidents of the African Union. In addition to that, to talk about the trade facilitation provisions, I think I already did this, whereby you have the committees, setting up of committees. Also, on the issue of measurement, what we all know, what measures gets done, what you measure gets done. It's important that at this stage we are starting, to implement this agreement. We have baseline, we have baseline studies being done so that we can be able to see what happens. You see, 1 year or 2 years down the line in terms of our implementation, has it borne fruit? Has the trade facilitation reforms that we put, have they borne fruit? As I mentioned, in 2013, we made an investment as Kenya. In 2018, we have seen that our investment has paid. But if we didn't do our baseline survey, or we didn't do a survey back in 2013, we would not know whether we are making a difference or we are not making a difference. And this brings into the ease of doing business. I think some of you have heard about the World Bank Ease of Doing Business Index, which ranks countries. This is a very good index because it shows how easy it is for people to do business in your country. It's important to be able to take such indexes very seriously. And in Kenya, what we've done, we have a committee actually just looks at all those indexes. It looked at the provisions of the World Bank Ease of Doing Business. And we have a cabinet secretary who's in charge of it, and there are meetings on a monthly basis to track it. That's why you've seen Kenya is normally the top when it comes to the ease of doing business rankings. I think last year we were around number 56, and we had improved. This is not, it's not a miracle. It's actually intentional. It's the reforms that we do. It is the procedures that we do. It is the simplification. It is the vision of debt. It is the enabling of SMEs. So it is very deliberate commitment from the top. Another thing is capacity building, creation of awareness. There's been a lot of publicity about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, but the publicity that has lacked is how do you take advantage of this? So how do I, as an individual or as a citizen, how does this agreement help me? You know, it looks big, it looks so technical, it looks so, people are saying it's nice, you know, it looks like overnight we are just going to move from here to here, but how does it help me how does it help me as an SME? How does it help me as a business, you know, a big business in a country? So governments need to move not only from just, you know, publicity about this agreement, but now putting down in place, you know, mechanisms how business can be able to plug into it. And we can start by simply just looking at it and saying, looking at what are other African countries importing from outside Africa. And we can be able to say, you know, and this information is available. Those of you who know about TradeMap, you can be able to just find out which country is importing that, and do we have the resources to develop production capacities for that. And we can say that this is an area we want to do to develop comparative advantage or competitive advantage and build towards it. But as government, you cannot do that alone. You need to consult with private sector. You need to work with private sector to ensure that this happens. I would also like to mention about the special differential treatment. I know there's been an argument that in Africa we have least developing countries, we have, you know, developing countries, and we also have a few developed countries. And there was a concern out there that, you know, countries who will benefit more, and we have countries who will not be able to benefit more. So for me, my solution for this, or my recommendation for this, is to have special differential treatment, especially for least developing countries. Just like the way we have special differential treatment in the WTO, us as developing countries, you know, we are treated differently. We are enabled, we are capacitated by the developed countries. I think this would be a way to be able to handle the least developed economies of Africa, whereby we can assist them to progressively liberalize their economies, as opposed to just, you know, opening up. The use of technology, I cannot overemphasize that. As Africa, we have been behind in terms of development, but we have key tools such as technology that can be able to help us, you know, to move leaps and bounds, as opposed to just moving as the way other developed countries moved. So I think it's important that we look at e-commerce platforms with smart ports, we look at smart borders, we look at single windows, and all those, you know, technological provisions that can be able to assist us to even facilitate trade. So I think for me, those would be the basic recommendations, which are centered on the trade facilitation agreement, can be able to accelerate the implementation of the agreement if we are able to implement them. So thank you very much, Ronnie. That was my presentation.
Thank you very much, Rose. That was quite interesting and helpful. Thank you for that well thought out presentation. I also like how you have recommendations in the end, on policy recommendations on how we can improve on some of these things. You know, whilst our colleagues are thinking of how to ask a question, can you maybe just shed some light on the US-Kenya, you know, free trade agreement, which is currently being negotiated, in relation to, you know, vis-a-vis the AfCFTA itself, because, you know, some people believe that there's a proliferation, and as a result, it may stifle, you know, some countries to move. What are your thoughts on this new free trade agreement that is under discussion at the moment?
I would say it's very controversial, but maybe I can give the government position, and I can give my own opinion. But I think the government is that our AGOA, the African Act, is coming to an end, and the United States of America is one of the biggest trading partner for Africa. Sorry, for Kenya. So the reasoning behind this is that we need to sustain, our trade between the U.S. and Kenya. So that was the reasoning behind, the free trade area, the proposed free trade agreement. However, we have observed, we've seen the objectives of the U.S. and we've also seen we've also given our own objectives as a country. So what is happening now is trying to, find a center or a place whereby we can be able to agree. I must say, as an individual, when I read the governments of the U.S., I found them to be almost offensive, because I think one of the objectives there was that if we were to enter into the free trade agreement with them, we would enter into any bilateral agreement with any country unless we consult the U.S. So some of those are very controversial, those are very controversial expectations that I think would be very negative for us. I think in addition to that, have industries that are still growing, and they're looking at complete access to our dairy industry, complete access to our wheat, to bring American wheat into Kenya. Also the telecommunication, the financial sector. So there are really a lot of concerns, there are very many concerns in terms of the industries here. But I'm happy that the Kenyan government has done extensive stakeholder engagement with the private sector, and they have given their input. So to see, is it possible to be able to come to an agreement with them without, without Kenya losing? I know South Africa once tried it, and I think it did not work some time back. I think around 2004, it didn't work. We don't know the Kenyan situation will go, but I think they are very determined. We can be able to see that. I think after some time we'll be able to see. Also, maybe the presidential elections, in November, the U.S. might be able to change might influence the negotiations. So for this, on my own personal opinion, I would say it would be very hard to negotiate the U.S. because what the U.S. has is they already have an agreement, because they are based on the policies and laws of the U.S. So the breathing space or the negotiating space that Kenya has is very, very slim. And if we want to change provisions, then it means the U.S. having to go back to, to their parliament, to their legislative institutions to be able to change some things. So I think it's a very tricky situation, but we are watching as it unfolds. Myself, I'm not part of the negotiations. I try to keep myself abreast with it. And we hope to see that either something good will come out of it, or we'll see what the alternative will be. I'm also happy that Kenya has involved the East Africa community, and it has shown goodwill to include the EAC countries, because as you know, we are part of the customs union at the EAC, so we are not even in a position to negotiate on our own. Our negotiation, we must be able to negotiate jointly with the other EAC. So those are some of the dynamics that are there that make it very difficult to negotiate with the US. But I believe Kenya is trying out on something. In terms of the impact to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, I don't think that it's going to be negative. I think the more we can be able to invite or have agreements to trade amongst each other, the better, because I think the more the world opens up, it becomes better, whereby we're moving, we're having income, and trade moving, amongst different countries. And I don't think US is necessarily interested in destabilizing the trade area, because I think there was some talk around that Kenya is being used to destabilize the Continental Free Trade Agreement. I don't think that is the case. But I would just like to say, I think Kenya will act in the best interest of the continent, as opposed to its own best interest. Yeah, so those would be my comments.
Thank you very much for that, Rose. Colleagues, is there anyone who has a question in the interim? The floor is open for questions now. And what I'm going to do is that our session is about 90 minutes, not more than that. But if we don't have questions after 3 asks and we are done with the presentations, we will end the webinar. So for now, is there anyone who has a question? Please feel free to raise your hand or where possible. So I know some people are not familiar with Zoom. You may just unmute yourself and ask a question if you have any. Any questions? Okay. Whilst we still, crafting the questions, let me ask you some. Oh, Memory, hello. Hi, Memory, I see you highlighted.
Yes.
I'm not sure
yes.
if you have. Okay, hi, Memory, welcome.
Thank you, Ronnie. Actually, maybe before I say anything, I think Kolofelo's hand was up before mine, so perhaps she should go first.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm unable to see the reactions here. So please, Albert, if you're there, just let me if there's a question. Kulu, welcome, and please share your thoughts with us.
Well, thank you very much, Memory, for giving me the floor. You're very kind. Rose, thank you so much for your presentation. It's always really good to hear more about the AfCFTA and to get some insight from professionals like yourself. But my question goes to the latter parts of your presentation about negotiating these FTAs with outside partners. And I mean, this is not necessarily targeted at Kenya, but just how to think about it as a continent that's trying to work on this regional project. How do we make sure that the gains and the work that we've put into the AfCFTA do not get eroded by bilateral deals with big partners? And also, Kenya being part of a customs union, and I mean, there's a few customs unions in the region. How do we make sure that, those deals do not erode, the common external tariff and sort of, the things that have been agreed regionally? I would just like to hear your input on that.
Thank you for that, Kulu. Rose, I'm going to ask Memory to maybe also just squeeze in her question there, so at least you have 2 questions to answer to. Memory, you may proceed.
Okay, thanks. I actually have, 2 questions, 2 comments and 1 question, if that is okay.
It's okay, absolutely okay. Please proceed. Thank you.
Okay, the first one it's a comment on the US-Kenya trade agreement. I think it would be interesting to see how it unfolds within the context of the MFN provision in the AfCFTA, where in the event that this agreement is successfully concluded, Kenya would be obliged to extend any and all concessions it grants to the US. But then knowing the US, there is actually a possibility that they might insist on some provision that would prevent Kenya from extending any concessions that it has given to the US to the AfCFTA member states. So how do we deal with that? Secondly, it's very well known that the US, operates from a template when it comes to trade agreements. And this is a very inflexible template, and there is a possibility that, not even a possibility, it is almost guaranteed that Kenya would be obliged to negotiate, WTO plus issues, basically. So issues, or rather, yeah, subjects that they're not yet ready to commit themselves on, you know, around intellectual property, around e-commerce. I know those are things that are going to be that are the subject rather of the phase 2 negotiations of the AfCFTA, but we're doing this as Africans within the African context, and when you take it to the global level, there's usually a demand to have developing countries, as we have in Africa, to commit to standards that are not you know, compatible with their development status. So that is another concern. So when Rose says that she's not worried, I am actually, you know, very worried, and I'm quite curious to see how this all unfolds in the long run. And then my second question, or rather my second comment, is on, so Rose mentioned the need for us, or rather proposed that we come up with African standards for African goods. And I'm not too sure about that, because I think part of the objective of the AfCFTA, and even before we got to the AfCFTA, it's been a long-standing objective of African countries, of the African Union, of our various regional economic communities. It's been a long-standing objective that we industrialize, we enhance our manufacturing, and hence part of the objective of the AfCFTA is to facilitate industrialization within the continent and enhance manufacturing with the objective of capturing value in global value chains. And in order for us to be able to participate in those global value chains, we need to ensure that our products actually meet the global standard. And if we insist on African standards for African goods, which standards are, I assume, lower than the global standard, because you talk about, you know, the global standard being, you know, much, much higher and unattainable. So if we strive for lowering the standards for African goods, then we effectively take ourselves out of the race to join the, you know, global value chains. And anyone that knows the nature of trade today, you know, you have one component that is produced in South Africa, another one is produced in Egypt, and the final product is produced in, I don't know, China or the US. So it prevents us from participating in those value chains. So in as much as we want to increase intra-African trade, want to increase trade amongst ourselves, we still have to have our eye on, you know, competing globally. We want to be able to trade with our external partners in a way that goes beyond, you know, exporting commodities like we normally do, and we cannot do that if our products are not competitive. So we actually need, instead of emphasizing, you know, a lower standard for African goods, I think we need to emphasize rather the ability or increasing our capacity and ability to, you know, produce goods that are of a global standard. And then lastly, we are currently living within the context of COVID-19. So this is my third, it's a question, the third question. We are currently living within the context of COVID-19. And I don't know, you might have missed it. I did have some disturbances during your presentation, and I had to switch devices. But I didn't hear you mention anything about COVID-19. So my question would be, how do we ensure trade facilitation? How do we improve trade facilitation within the context of COVID-19 and lockdowns and border closures, etc., etc.? What's your opinion on that? And looking into the future, how do we make sure that whatever trade facilitation initiatives that we put in place now going forward, how do we ensure that they're resilient in the face of future global shocks? Thanks.
I think, thank you very much for a very detailed input, Memory. And I want to mention as well, Rose, that we also have a question on the message box from Makala's iPhone. And he was basically saying that the TFA is said to be 98% customs. So in a nutshell, it is there to cut off lots of red tapes that one encounters when trading. So how do we ensure ease of way of doing business if a developed or developing country is trading with an LDC? I think you did touch on that, but maybe in concluding your session now, you can just touch on that briefly as well. Thank you, Rose. You may respond.
Okay, thank you. I'll start with the last question about the trade facilitation agreement and how developed countries can be able to trade, developing or at least developing countries. So just to repeat on that, I proposed in one of my propositions was to have special differentiation, and we've seen this work very well in the WTO. So my is that also at the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we have special differentiation so that we ensure that countries, least developing countries trading with the developed countries are not having, unfair trade, or there isn't an unfair advantage. So in terms of trade liberalization, it should probably be progressive, assistance or technical assistance and financial assistance, to these countries. So that would be my answer. I'll go to the question about COVID-19 and how, yes, indeed, I didn't touch on this, but it's important. It's a very current issue. Actually, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a blessing in disguise to trade facilitation, because what has happened is that it has forced countries to automate. It has forced, customs organizations or customs officials to move automation, to prevent that human-to-human contact. I know, for example, in Kenya, we have the COVID certificate, which has now been automated, whereby truck drivers who are moving goods across are tested in Mombasa, and the certificate is uploaded on a portal, and when they get to the border, they are able to clear very fast. So those are some of the automations that are there. I know, for example, customs have now done release of cargo is now done automatically through the customs system in Kenya. Initially, before COVID-19, we had the manual releases, whereby you had to provide, your papers, you had to, provide permits and everything to a customs officer. But now you are able to upload all that in the single window system, and automatic releases are given. These are just a few of the reforms that have been done on the trade facilitation front that we are hoping that are going to be permanent. And what I normally say is that a habit is something you do, you develop in 21 days. The blessing here is that COVID-19 is here to stay for some time. So it will give us the time to ensure that these innovations, automations that we are doing, or these trade facilitation initiatives are now permanent. They are not, we will not go back to those manual procedures that were before. I'll go back to the question of African or African goods. I think I was not very clear on this. Proposition was this was as a short-term mechanism to jumpstart trade into African trade. Yes, in the long term, it's important that we to international standards, but my proposition is that can we be able to see what we can be able to, what standards can we be able to, mutually agree amongst ourselves that are not so high, but they are also aspirational, whereby we can have, an implementation plan whereby we say within a certain period of time, you should have gotten to this level of standard. Because what we want is that we want to sign an agreement that we can be able to, of January, we should be able to trade. And if we say that we are going to need all African countries to have these international standards, then we are looking at trade. We are looking at the agreement, having tangible effects, in 5 years, in 10 years, because countries now must invest, must put money to be able to ensure that they meet, these basic standards. So for me, I'm looking at it having it being short term, as now we move towards attaining the international standards. That would be my comment on that. On the issue of, I think there was a question on the African, the Kenya USA proposed free trade area. You'll allow me not to comment on this because I'm a government official, and I would not want to comment on something that I'm not very sure about. But what I'd like to throw it back to you is maybe we can have a discussion on it, and then I can be able to, take the sentiments to my team back there. It would not be fair for me to be quoted on this because I'm not an expert. I just have much information as probably you have. And as I said also, in my personal opinion, not as a government officer, but my own opinion, I feel that we might not so much to gain out of it as Kenya, unfortunately. Yeah. But I hope I would not want to be quoted on that.
Rose, your secret is safe with us. Kulu, I'm not sure, Rose. Kulu's issue. Kulu, did we cover your issue as well?
Yes.
On the issue at the end. Yeah, that was at the end, and I appreciate Rose's position, especially professional position, and I won't push, but I just wanted to get her view from it. Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sorry I was not able to answer about the Kenya-USA FTA because I think it would be part of me as a trade professional to talk about something that I'm not very conversant with, and also as a government official, it would not be fair, so comments are probably just as an individual, a hunch I have, basically.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, colleagues. Do we have any further questions?
Yes, so it appears that Memory might have a follow-up.
A follow-up. Okay, Memory, please go for it.
Thanks. It's less of a follow-up, and just to say that I appreciate Rose's position on commenting on the U.S. Kenya free trade proposed free trade agreement, and also commenting on the assumption that we're operating under Chatham House rules. I'm speaking in my personal capacity because I work for a multilateral development institution, so I just wanted to emphasize that as well, that I'm also speaking in my personal capacity. Thanks.
Caveat there. Now, Rose, whilst someone else is going to ask a question, colleagues, you must laugh at me because I've been emphasizing that people should raise their hand on the platform. Then I realized I actually don't know how that works. But I've sorted that out now, hopefully. So, Rose, for someone, because I see we've got some eminent business persons in our discussion forum today. What is the main? What are your main products, import products, which someone from anywhere on the continent can say, I want to do business in Kenya, I must focus on this. I saw the report. Maybe that's one. The second one would be you mentioned earlier on that there's been a saving of about 2.5 billion Kenyan shillings. Since the advent of the TFA in the form of the single window. I want to know where and how those savings were received, but also just to give us a brief sense. I saw a report from TRALEC, for which I'm very thankful for. I think colleagues, TRALEC is very helpful in terms of giving us statistics, and they mentioned in the Kenya report specifically that there's been a 3% increase of intra-Africa trade, between Kenya and other African countries. I suppose that's probably one of the only increases. And the like. So if you can just share some thoughts on that, firstly the savings, secondly, what can I as a business person, for those who are here, focus on if they want to take stuff to Kenya, and so on. Thank you, Rose.
Okay. I'll start with the question of the savings, the 2.5 billion savings to the Kenyan economy. Basically, what the World Bank did a study to compare how it was, how trade was before the implementation of the single window and how trade is after the automation. So some of those considerations were reduced paperwork. There is, you're having less people handling a transaction. you're having less movement from one government agency to another. You're having, payment being done online, as opposed to, going to the bank to make a payment. So those are some of the savings that were aggregated. But this report is available. I can be able to share with you. The report is a public report by the World Bank, so that you can be able. It can assist you to look at the nitty details in terms of the savings, and even the time, the reduction of times. Reduction of time from cargo clearance from the initial 14 to 3 days now. So I think I can be able to give you, which can be able to assist you further to see what Kenya has done. You also asked about what main business products that Kenya imports. Imports quite a bit of things. We import dairy, we import and meat products. We import vehicle parts. We import agricultural commodities, self-sufficient in everything. We import wheat, we import rice, quite a bit of agricultural commodities that we import. We import clothing. What maybe I can also do on this is, for the person who is specifically interested, I can be able to provide a comprehensive report on what the areas that are potential for trade in Kenya. But I can also highlight what we export. We export horticulture, we export flowers, we export some pharmaceuticals, we export tea, we export coffee. So those are some of our big export earners. We are also a very a tourism destination. We have the safari. We have interesting tourist destinations. We receive quite a bit of tourists coming to Kenya. Yeah, so I think those are some of the areas, potential areas for trade that I can mention for now.
Rose, thank you very much for that. Colleagues, do we have any more questions for Rose? Yeah. I'm not seeing any hands yet. Maybe some of our colleagues are shy. I'm not shy, Rose, so I'm going to ask you another question. You mentioned the role of business in putting this whole trade facilitation together. And in all our previous webinars, there was always a question of business, particularly in the South African context, sitting on the sidelines, looking in, wondering what's happening. And most of the blame has been put on the state. Excuse me, to say that the state is very, focused on diplomatic, ties, and therefore that's why we have this situation. What role is Kenyan business playing in all of this? Do you see them as active participants in the process? Are they helpful, or are they also just standing on the sideline, wondering what's going on?
Very fortunately, the Kenyan business community is they are very active participants, and that has also made them very impactful or is that they have organized themselves into associations. We have the Kenya Association of Private Sector Association, Kenya Association of Manufacturers. We have the Association of Freight Forwarders. So they've structured themselves into associations. So it becomes very easy for government to engage. And another thing is that the Kenyan Constitution, we had a constitution change in 2010, which one of the provisions of the Constitution is that there to be mandatory stakeholder participation or mandatory citizen participation. So not only is government, it is no longer a good to have, but it is a must to have. We are seeing now litigations whereby if you implement anything as without stakeholder consultation or stakeholder or citizen engagement, you can easily be taken to court, and whatever you have implemented can be nullified. So I would say there is a lot of engagement, especially on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We developed as Kenya, we develop our own implementation strategy. We have an implementation strategy on how we can be able to implement agreement, which we crafted the implementation together with the private sector. All the private sector were represented. The forum was sponsored by so my answer to that is that the Kenyan private sector is very active and involved, and we have them also in committees. They're not only involved. They're not only involved when agreements come, when such agreements as a continental free trade area. They are permanently involved in committees. Like you see, the National Trade Facilitation Committee has a permanent representative from the private sector, who is the chairman of the Kenya Sector Association. We have the Mombasa Port Charter, which is a charter that brings all the stakeholders of the port. We have representation, and these are gazetted committees for trade facilitation. We have the Border Coordination and Control Committee, which has now private sector representation. So the way Kenya structured it is that not only do we ask the private sector to comment, when we have, such agreements, but they are entrenched in the decision making for government. They contribute when we are going for negotiations with the representatives. So that is the approach that was taken with private sector, and it has been very successful. Even in the Kenya-USA FTA, there has been extensive consultation with the private sector.
Great, thank you so much. That sounds very helpful to have a consultative environment. Okay, colleagues, are there any further questions from the floor?
It appears not, sir.
It appears not. Okay, so clearly, Rose, you were exceptionally clear that you stole all the questions from the people that had them. So I would want. Yeah, so thank you very much. In fact, we also have a comment in the message box that says, thank you very much for an insightful presentation. So thank you very much for that, Rose. Very much appreciated. The beginning of our discussions. I can imagine that we're going to be discussing some of these things for a very, very long time to come. And I'm very grateful that you were able to avail yourself. The colleagues who are our guests here today, thank you very much as well for you and your time. And please, if you have any expertise in this area and you feel that you can add value to some of our webinars going forward, please just get in touch with us. And so on. So thank you for your time. Thank you for attending, and we're looking forward to hosting you again in very due course. Thank you, and good evening.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
You too. Bye.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you, colleagues. I see everyone is who's there. Dr. Pastor Teach, thank you to you as well. Thank you to Mehdi, Makala, Abel Mukwebo, Media Fella, who's putting together our webinars for us. Thank you once again for a wonderful show that you've put together. Sbongi, I see you there, Memory, and everybody else that were attending today. Thank you very much once again, and goodbye.